if an individual loses a mother or loved one, and they are struggling, that they are entitled to that is a normal experience, and that I personally would encourage them to not do it alone.
Yeah.
One of the things I heard you say earlier was you needed community. Yeah. We do. We are built to live in community. Whether you're extroverted or introverted is not the point. We are built to live in community. Yeah. And so having a safe place to process the range of emotions that can and will take place when there is a loss of a significant relationship, whether that relationship was as desired as we would want it or not. We all need safety for that. And I think that's the thing that's most important.
Yeah.
Welcome to the Sweet Mother Podcast. This podcast exists to tell the stories of powerful women as told by the daughters they've left behind. I'm your host, Soko Sholanke. With the holidays approaching, and with my family and I approaching the 1-year anniversary of my mother's passing, I decided to do a special episode focused on the topics of grief and counselling. So I interviewed Dr. Simmons. Dr. Simmons is a licensed mental health counsellor and the owner and executive director of the Collective Wellness Institute in Tampa, Florida. In part 2 of this interview, we discussed many aspects of grief, including how each person's grief journey is different, society's attitudes towards grief, and missing a loved one during the holidays or other special dates. If you enjoy this podcast, don't forget to subscribe and perhaps even leave a review so we can continue to expand our audience. My hope is that these episodes will be beneficial, not just to those who've lost a mother, but also to those who are grieving the loss of anyone or anything near and dear to them.
So I want to talk to you now about grief counseling. This podcast exists to talk to women who've lost their mothers about the life and legacy of their mother and what it was like to have a great mother and what it's like to lose a great mother. But a surprising audience that I've found actually is women who did not have a good relationship with their mother, who maybe didn't have a mother or are estranged from their mother. Perhaps there was abuse, there's toxicity in the relationship. And some of those women have reached out to me and said, this is really encouraging because I never had that, or I don't have that with my mother. It's good to know there are good mothers out there. So that got me thinking about the grief process and how, for me, the reason I still grieve my mother is because I had something good and I want more of that. And I miss that. But how is the grief complicated when you lose your mother and you had a poor relationship or a non-existent relationship?
You know, each individual situation is different. And one of the things that I talk about in therapy is avoiding the very, very common practice of comparison.
Yeah.
And so what I would say is grief of any kind, whether the mom is present, whether the mom was good, whether the mom was absent, whether the mom was toxic, grief of any kind is and can be difficult and complicated.
Yeah.
How an individual navigates that loss or the losses, because the death of a parent could perpetuate more than one loss.
Yeah.
Is really going to be in a product of who that individual is, what that individual, how that individual sees that loss, and how that individual is resourced.
Yeah.
Right. So when I talk about not comparing, I talk about we are all equipped and resourced differently.
Yeah.
The timing of the losses could be significant. Like what was happening in the relationship with those two women could be significant. Whether or not that loss was anticipated, meaning that mother was ill and it was a gradual decline.
Yeah.
whether there was proximity. So there's so many variables that can contribute to how an individual navigates the loss and experiences it. So I hesitate to say that grief is more challenging when it isn't good or less challenging when the relationship isn't good, because each woman could be in a different place with their mother. It could be toxic. The relationship could have been toxic, but that woman could have gone through therapy already, could have worked through that and come to terms with, they could have redefined their relationship. That woman could see another person as a woman, could have blocked her biological mother out as. So there's so many variables that go into how an individual navigates. What I think is most important is if an individual loses a mother or a loved one and they are struggling, that they are entitled to that is a normal experience. And that I personally would encourage them to not do it alone.
Yeah.
One of the things I heard you say earlier was you needed community.
Yeah.
We do. We are built to live in community. Whether you're extroverted or introverted is not the point. We are built to live in community.
Yeah.
And so having a safe place to process the range of emotions that can and will take place when there is a loss of a significant relationship, whether that relationship was as desired as we would want it or not. We all need safety for that. And I think that's the thing that's most important.
Yeah. You mentioned the community. It was one thing I love about my culture, the West African culture, is when somebody passes, people just pile into your house. Like they do not leave you alone because they don't want you to be alone.
Right.
And so my experience is my non-African friends will call and say, I want to come over but I want to give you time. And I'm like, everybody's here. Come. Everybody's here. And they'll come over and they'll say, why are you in the kitchen cooking? This is what we do. We're cooking, we're feeding, we're eating,
Right.
Everybody just piles in and they don't leave you alone. I just love that about my culture. Yeah. At the end of the school year, a colleague gave me a card. And she's in the card, she wrote that you went through so much this year. She's talking about the loss of my mother and everything. You went through so much this year, but you just kept on. I thought you would stop, but you just kept on going. And she said it as a compliment. It's almost like the fact that I kept on going, which, by the way, for me was very detrimental to my health, mentally and physically. But she said it as though it was a compliment. It was like a sign of strength. But like, as I said, that was actually detrimental to my health. But I believe that society sees that as a sign of strength to keep going.
We do.
Yeah.
Unfortunately. Again, I'm perceiving that friend may have been in one of those sub communities.
Yes.
Black.
Yes.
Yes. and so
in all three.
Right.
And minority. Yes. I know.
So it is seen as a sign. It is, well, let me back up. It is a sign of strength.
Yeah.
It is a sign of strength.
And I know for some people, actually working and getting their mind off it is actually helpful.
Sure.
Yes.
It is a sign of strength until it is detrimental.
Yeah.
Right. So it is, if you keep going, like if you're running a race and you keep going, you're strong, right? Yeah. But if you kept running that race and your Achilles was ruptured, like and you're doing damage, that wasn't wise. It was detrimental.
Yeah.
And so, in our community, again, all three of those communities have this survivalist type gene, if you will. And we value when individuals find a way to keep moving.
Yeah.
There is benefit to being able to do that until it is unhealthy.
Yeah.
Right? There are reasons why, for a number of us, we have had to do that.
Yeah.
In communities that have struggled financially or whatever, and a woman has to do 2 and 3 jobs to pay the bills, she has to
Yes.
keep going.
Yeah.
And there's a scorn, if you will,
Yeah.
for the woman who just decides she's going to stay home and collect public assistance, who is able-bodied.
Yeah.
Right? We scorn that.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know that either is better or the other.
Mm-hmm.
There is an important lesson in that we need to give people the space to do whatever it is for them to be healthy.
Yeah.
So that woman who decides, oh, she's just going to stay home, she's able-bodied, but she's going to stay home, she could be recovering from something.
Yeah.
But the outside world just knows she's able-bodied, right? And so this idea of looking into the lives of other people and placing judgment is a little toxic.
Yeah.
But you are absolutely right. Historically, being able to keep pushing has been a sign of strength.
Yeah.
It is also a sign of strength that for many people has intangible costs at the end.
Yes.
And as we become more and more aware of that, we have been able to teach people the value of rest.
Yes.
Because even God rested.
Yes, he did. I think that Black women especially need to learn that lesson about the value of rest, because we just keep on pushing.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
You mentioned giving people space. Another thing I noticed in the society, maybe it's just my perception, but it seems in this society that there are timelines for grief that are kind of imposed on people, meaning that, okay, well, it's been 2 weeks, time to come back to work. Okay, well, it's been like 3 weeks, nobody at work wants to hear about it anymore. Like, just get on with it, you know? And it feels like, I remember just getting to 6 months and thinking, okay, I can't mention it anymore because nobody wants to hear about it anymore. You know, it's been 6 months, it's time to get over it. You know, the visitors stop coming, the casserole stop coming, the condolences stop. Nobody wants to hear about it. Time to go back to normal. It just feels like an unnatural timeline because everybody grieves differently.
Absolutely. Yeah, there's no legitimate timeline for grief. And again, the same reasons why we wouldn't compare someone's grief of a parent who was present versus someone's grief of a parent who wasn't is the same reasons why we would not put a timeline on a grief, right? This is a very personal experience. However, our country of which, by the way, is made up of all immigrants. Okay, that's it. We got to tell the truth about this. There's a number of these systems have all been influenced by people with the survivalist mentality. And so, and we've monetized everything.
Yeah.
And so we evaluate, how costly it can be for someone not to be on the job, so forth and so on. And so as a result, we have grief timelines. Most people get like maybe 3 or 4 days off of grief with pay.
Yes.
and then you have to tap into your vacation. And if you're caring for a family, FMLA, you can only get that for so many weeks. And so we have attached these very quantitative ideas and benefits to the policies that support people in their difficult times. And as a result, no, maybe not, maybe it's not fair to say as a result, but in conjunction with people's own discomfort around these topics, we impose directly sometimes and indirectly at times this idea that, okay, it's time to shake it off by now.
Yeah.
Some people have been bold enough to say, "You still on that?"
Yeah.
And others would not dare say it, but in their mind, they're growing concerned.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So
I think for me, that's why I just felt so uneasy when 6 months came around. I realized that I'm in a worse place. I guess I kind of wasn't expecting that experience.
Oftentimes, what people fail to realize is that in the beginning, you just described this hustle and bustle. The house is full.
Yeah.
That's all distraction.
Yeah.
It's all distraction. So now when everyone goes away and fizzles away, you're left with nothing but your thoughts, your memories, your routines.
Yeah.
And there's no distraction from that.
Yeah.
So yeah, it makes sense.
Yeah. I heard somebody say once that it was a pastor. He was preaching a message, and he was saying, we need to not try and run away from grief, because you can do all your distractions, keep busy, whatever, and grief is going to be over in the corner doing push-ups, just waiting for you.
Just waiting.
Yeah. And then when you finish being busy, it's okay, now we're going to deal with this. And perhaps that's what happened with me.
And it's important to realize that, it can be a long-term process.
Yeah.
I often talk about redefining normal.
Mm-hmm.
And when you do life with someone who is now no longer with you, whatever you did with that person now has to be reevaluated.
Yeah.
And if you did life with that person intimately, regularly, consistently, that's going to show up.
Yeah.
So if you had everyday calls, you had weekly routines, you had quarterly trips, you had annual family reunions, you had birthdays and milestones and traditions. All of those things now have to be faced with the person gone.
Yeah.
And you have to redefine that.
Mm-hmm.
And for some of those things, they may only happen a couple of times a year.
Yeah.
So it might be a couple years before you figure out what it is that, what does this even mean to me?
Yeah.
And so it's just important to give yourself space and grace to figure it out without pressure, because it's a personal thing.
Yeah. That's good. I like that, space and grace. I like that. That ties into the topic of, you talk about special dates.
Yes.
So for me, of my siblings, next week will be 1 year since my mom passed. It's 1 year actually, and this week actually was 8 years since my father passed. The holidays are coming. Thanksgiving is coming. Christmas is coming. What would you advise people who are missing a loved one to plan ahead when they know a potentially difficult date is coming?
You said it, plan ahead. When I have an opportunity to work with someone for an extended period of time, and I know that there's some of my clients I know, oh, you know what, such and such's mother passed here, and we need to talk about this.
Yeah.
I always talk to them about, okay, what are your plans?
Yeah.
And what are you thinking?
Mm-hmm.
How are you feeling? One particular person came to mind, and there was a milestone coming up, and she just didn't want to be bothered with anybody. She didn't want to go to anybody's house. She didn't want to do anything. She wanted to stay home, lay on her couch, and eat ice cream. And I said, are you sure that's what you want to do? And she said, that's what I want to do.
Yeah.
She said, I don't want to deal with people. I don't want to be fussing and figuring out stuff for people. I just don't want to do that. I don't want to serve.
Yeah.
I just want to veg. And I honor people where they are at. And that's what she wanted to do. I encouraged her to do that. But we have really good conversations about, okay, let's really think about what might be faced. Let's think about what you used to do and how poignant it's going to be for you that that's not happening. Do you feel like you want to be in connection and community with people? Do you feel like you want to honor this individual in some way? Do you feel like you just need an escape?
Yeah.
To me, it doesn't matter what you do, but that you plan for it.
Yeah.
And you don't ignore the fact that a tough day is coming.
Yeah.
And then allow it to just kind of punch you in the gut.
Yeah.
And I often talk about multiple plans, depending on how recent the loss is and what has happened maybe in the past.
Yeah.
And the relationship, again, it's all contextual, the relationship of the individual. And so, I may say, okay, so what if, this is the plan, but what if that doesn't work out? Or what if people don't show up for you? Or what if people cancel? Like, what else?
Yeah.
What's your backup plan so that you're prepared for it? And I find, as with many things, when a person is prepared for a thing, it is not as bad as they thought it might be.
That's very true. Because I remember last Christmas, first Christmas without my mother. I remember just being so agitated Christmas Eve. I'm preparing food. I'm cleaning the kitchen. I'm so agitated with everybody. And then I realized it's because I was doing the things that I did with her. We prepared these meals together. We fussed at each other together, and she was missing. And then I went to the gravesite on Christmas morning, and I felt a lot better. So now I know that actually going to see her is the thing that's going to help me.
Right.
And then when my mother's birthday was coming around, it was in August, that it was probably a better idea for me to take off and go hang out with my sister and do something fun, which we did. So planned ahead. That worked out well.
Planned ahead.
Yeah. Dr. Simmons, I have a friend who the mother is in hospice. She has Alzheimer's and a cancer diagnosis. And the hospice provided grief counseling to my friend, which I'd never heard of before. But apparently this is a thing that, so when somebody is, an elderly
Terminal.
person, yes, has a condition where you're watching them waste away, that grief counseling is appropriate before they pass.
Yes.
Yeah. Can you speak to that?
It is. I alluded to it a little bit earlier. Many may not recognize this anticipatory loss. It anticipated. Like you love someone and you're watching them change for the worse. And you know what's at the other side of that.
Yeah.
And so but yet you are looking to make the most of those moments, and you're tasked with managing the demands of today while honoring what you currently have, with this individual. And I can actually know of someone right now who is in a similar situation. And so it is loss.
Yeah.
Whenever you don't have what you used to have, it is loss.
Yeah.
And when one loses, it is likely that there is a grief process that is necessary.
Yeah.
If you lose trust, if you lose a friendship, if you lose a job, if what you thought your life would be like as a mother is not turning out to be like that. We have all these ideas about how life should be. Our thoughts, our jobs, our relationships, our homes. We just had a natural disaster. This idea that we can be safe all the time, right? So there's all of these opportunities for loss. Grief is therefore very likely to be associated with that. But watching someone gradually fade away, if you will, can actually be traumatic.
Yeah.
And so we definitely want to mitigate that experience as much as possible.
Yeah.
And so I applaud the hospice organization for doing that. It's absolutely appropriate.
Yeah. I didn't, like I said, I didn't even know that was a thing. But that sounds like a wonderful thing.
I recently shared an article on LinkedIn about that because that is a very real issue that oftentimes gets lost.
Yeah. I have a family member who passed away at the end of 2019. And then a few months later, COVID hit. And I remember going to visit about a year or so later, 2 years later, not knowing my mother would have a very similar diagnosis. But what stuck out to me is that I remember we went to visit the family member. My sister made a comment about, it's as though COVID put the grief on hold. How were people grieving through COVID?
It was complicated because in ways it was another loss. So at the beginning of COVID, the pandemic, funeral homes were overwhelmed because the deaths were happening in great numbers.
Yeah.
And because of the newness of the COVID-19 diagnosis and the way that it spread and a level of I'm going to say hysteria, because now we operate a whole lot differently and COVID is still COVID.
Yeah.
So there were limitations to being able to go to the funeral home. There were limitations on how many people could actually come to a service. There were these technicalities that was associated with the public healthcare crisis that complicated people's abilities to do what they normally did when grief hit their doors. Yeah. And so many families have a process. You described it yourself. Many people address grief and loss a certain way. This is what we do. This is where we go. We go to our funeral home. This is who does it. Then after that, this is what we do, so forth and so on. And that just was not happening. Yeah. There was a shutdown. People weren't able to come out. Depending on where you lived, you weren't able to even come outside. And so memorial services have been delayed. Yeah. I actually know someone who's having a memorial service tomorrow for something that happened, I don't even know how long ago. Oh, wow. And so you've got all of that. People do better with consistency and predictability.
And community.
And community. Yeah. And so COVID took all of that away. Yeah. It immediately isolated because you quarantined in your home. The consistency of doing whatever we used to do was out the window because now you're subjected to whatever public ordinances were in play. Yeah. Right? And the predictability was out the question because the organizations that support the process of death and burial, they were figuring it out. Yeah. Right? And they were not all doing the same thing. Yeah. Like you could be in one county and have one, access. Yeah. You can be in another county and not have access. Yeah. And that was true for most healthcare issues, including like giving birth and so forth. But that's what it was. And so in many ways it did complicate and for some delay the bereavement process. Yeah.
So your practice is here in the Tampa Bay area. So you are a resource for the community. What other resources, mental health resources, would you suggest or promote that exist in our community for people who want help?
So there are a host of other practices. Therapy sometimes needs to be supported with a medication. Yeah. And so there are individuals who prescribe to support. There are support groups that individuals can become a part of. From a mental health perspective, from a direct mental health perspective, those are the things that stand out. There are organizations that do training in community so that you can help the community learn more about mental health. Yeah. And I would like it to be a little more diverse, but those are the categories that are most represented in terms of. And then there's the crisis, the crisis-oriented services. Yes. And of course, hospitalization. Okay. And so those services are generally for folks who are struggling in a different way.
Okay. All right. So thank you, Dr. Simmons, for taking this time to talk to us today about your practice, about the community, about the attitudes towards counseling in various communities, and about grief counseling and the grief process.
It was absolutely my pleasure. I appreciate the opportunity once again, and I'm glad that this project is there because this is a service. This is a resource that we believe in and we've shared with others because there's healing. It doesn't stop in the therapy room. It's a long-term, lifelong process. And in our communities, we have found healing to come in a number of ways when we get to own that journey. Yeah. And we get to define it and we get to personalize it. And so that's what makes this particular project so wonderful to see someone transform a very personal, difficult situation into something that is incredibly empowering. Yeah. And that is absolutely what we represent.
Yeah. Well, that's very encouraging to hear. Thank you.
You are welcome.
All right. Thanks.
Well, thank you for listening to this special 2-part episode of the podcast. For more information on Dr. Simmons and the Collective Wellness Institute, please check out the show notes attached to this episode. There you'll also find more information on mental health resources for those in the Tampa Bay area. If you enjoy this podcast, don't forget to subscribe and perhaps even leave a review so we can continue to expand our audience. If you have a question or comment about the show, you could email me at sweetmotherpodcast@gmail.com. If you'd like to hear more from me, check out my blog at medium.com/@SOCO. That's medium.com/@SOHKOR. You can also find me on Instagram at SOCO_rights. That's at SOHKOR_rights. Thank you for listening and have a blessed holiday season.